Hello class. Today I'm going to demonstrate for you the first exercise. Our first paint mixing or color mixing exercise will go over mixing up 3 different kinds of black. We're going to make our own black, and we're going to make value scales. So we're covering the principle of value as well as the principles of warm and cool, which is about tone, in part anyway. So tone and value is what we're dealing with in today's exercise. You're going to need burnt umber, you're going to need ultramarine blue, and you're going to need titanium white. You'll also need linseed oil and of course your solvent. I'm using low odor mineral spirits. I've already poured them into a jar, ready to go. Okay, now the first thing we do when we squeeze out the paint from the tube is we need to oil the paint. Now, I'm using a large canvas panel as a palette today. I'll be actually executing the exercise on a smaller canvas panel. This is the 9x12 canvas panel. This one is substantively larger. I think this is 12x14. Anyway, I like a rectangular palette because it helps me lay out the paints in an orderly fashion. You can use, of course, the more traditional shaped oval palette if you so desire, but the paints lay out in a similar fashion. We are using what's referred to as a standard palette. A standard palette is a configuration, or any configuration, of laying out the color where the color is laid out in the same place on the palette consistently. There are any number, or there are multiple types of standard palette. This is the one I'm using. What I've done is I've laid out ultramarine blue in the far right corner. To me it's the left, for you it's the right. I've placed burnt umber slightly right of center, and then isolated way over here in the what is for me far right but for you far left corner, I have my titanium white. And the first thing I'm going to do is to oil the paint. Now what that means is that I'm going to add linseed oil into the paint. The paint, when it comes out of the tube, it's already got linseed oil mixed in it. I mean, this is oil paint. But sometimes, and it depends upon the color and what it's made from, so sometimes or oftentimes the paint comes out a very thick consistency. It's pasty. Burnt umber in particular tends to be rather pasty. It comes out of the tube the consistency of a thick toothpaste. And that's not really what we need. What we want is for the paint to be soft, okay? Soft to the touch, mutable. Like if you took a stick of margarine and left it out on the countertop, eventually it becomes room temperature, and it doesn't melt. It's not fluid, it's not liquid, but it's very, very soft to the touch, and you can blend it into whatever else you're making very easily. Okay, that's what you want. You want to add just enough oil to the paint so that it is soft to the touch, it is a little more malleable. You can see that already. Room temperature margarine would be the consistency you want for the paint. Same is true for the ultramarine blue, although it tends to come out of the tube a little more oily, or fat as we like to call it, than what the burnt umber does. Paint that has a lot of oil in it, we refer to it as being fat. We can refer to it as being fat. And paint that has a lot of solvent in it, we can refer to that as being lean. So fat and lean, those are 2 words you'll hear me say. The oil is the medium, or vehicle. Sometimes it's called vehicle. It's what makes the paint go, right? And the solvent is a thinner. If I need to make the paint thinner, I'll mix solvent into it. So in this demonstration video, I'm showing you how to lay out the palette for this exercise. I'm going to show you the exercise, and then the exercise, the theory behind the exercise, the color theory behind the exercise, that's actually going to be what we use for the first painting assignment, which I will go over in another demonstration or in another video. But I want to get you started with this. Now, when I send this video out to you, class, I will also send out a written text, written instructions that covers pretty much what I'm talking about in this video. And between the demonstration video and the written instructions, you should be able to get a pretty good idea of what we're doing. And the great thing about having a link to a video is that you can watch it multiple times. Okay? So let me set this aside for just a moment. And let's add some linseed oil to our white, to our titanium white. So we'll be making value scales. We're going to make a medium black, what I like to call a medium black. We'll make a cool black, and we'll make a warm black. Now let's talk about warm and cool for just a moment. What is warm and cool? What does temperature have to do with paint? Well, we're talking about tonality to a certain extent, and let me generalize it this way. Cool colors are colors which tend towards the blue end of the color spectrum, the light spectrum, if you will. Remember, color is a function of light. We see color by virtue of light. The pigment that's in any particular color or any object that has color absorbs all of the spectrum of color that is in white light, except for the color that the pigment is, and that is the color that's reflected back out, or the light that's reflected back out and is seen as color. So if I have a red object, hit it with daylight, white light, sunlight, it absorbs all the colors of the spectrum and reflects back out red. Now that's the science of optics. Where that has application for us as painters is that, well, just like I said, colors that tend towards the red end of the spectrum, we refer to as being warm. We can refer to them as being warm. Whereas colors that tend towards the blue end of the spectrum, we refer to as being cool. Tonality or color temperature has a lot to do with the range of color that we can use, even when we're dealing with a limited palette, like gray, black and gray, okay? How we perceive a color is often relative. You know, a color that will appear dark in one configuration, well, if you set it in a different configuration, that is to say with other color neighbors or neighboring colors, that same color that did appear dark the first time may actually appear rather light by comparison the second time. So in one sense, warm and cool is a relative thing, as value can be a relative thing. However, our eyes only see so much, and we can make certain generalizations that tend to be true about dark and light and warm and cool. Okay, so what I'm doing right now is I'm going to mix up a middle black. And I'm going to set my blacks over here, okay, and then I'll make grays. Middle black is a combination, or for our purposes, other professors will show you other techniques. This is a technique that I have used, and I'm showing it to you. I'm asking you to use this for this exercise and for this first assignment. Okay, and as I said, we're dealing with value, light and dark. There's as many ways to paint as there are painters painting, okay? There's no one way. There are, however, tried and true techniques that have been used and passed down through the centuries. And there are various traditions that have application. And I'm going to show you one way to go about this. Now, I'm making a middle black, as I said. Middle black is roughly equal portions of ultramarine blue and burnt umber. Okay? And I call it middle black because when I make a gray, you'll see that it's a middle gray. If it's a cool gray, or if I have too much blue in my mix here, the grays will appear bluish. If I have more burnt umber, the grays will appear a bit tannish, okay? Warm and cool. So what I'm shooting for is a middle black, roughly an equal mix of ultramarine blue and burnt umber. And then I'm going to test this out. And I'll test it out. I'm actually looking at it some. When I thin it like that, I'm looking at the canvas panel underneath and I'm trying to gauge the black. Now from your position, looking at this demonstration on the video, all these colors may look rather dark. Well, look a little closer or follow along. That's a very helpful technique. Just follow along, do this as I'm doing it, and see for yourself. When you look at the paint up close, my eyes are about a foot away from the surface of the canvas panel. You can see differentiations between the colors already. Okay, so I think I've just about got it. I'm going to test it now. I'm going to lay some there, and I'm going to get a small portion of white, and I'm actually going to use a separate knife. Hey guys, it's a good idea to have more than one painting knife. You also need rags, okay? Wipe your knives and brushes off on rags. Let's see. I think this is a little bit warmer than I want it to be. It's close, but it's still a little bit warm, which means what? What do I need to do? I need to cool that down. So I'm going to come back to this blue and add a little more blue to it. Not too much, just enough to try to cool it down, get it a little closer to center. One of the purposes behind the series of color mixing exercises that we'll be doing is to help you build your color acuity. Color acuity. That has to do, or that refers to your capacity to judge a color, to judge its value, to judge its tone, whether it's warm or cool, or how warm or cool it might be, to judge its hue. All right, what color is it compared to other colors around it? All right, to appreciate or get to a point where you understand for yourself what a color is doing, especially in conjunction with its neighbors. That is to say, what other colors you're putting next to it. Okay, so let's go this again. I've got my revised black here. I added a little more blue. Okay, I think that's better. Yes, I do. Ta-da! Now this is a slightly lighter tint. Anytime you add white to a color, that's a tint. So even your grays are actually tints of black. They're gray. It's a slightly lighter value gray because there's a larger portion of white mixed into the portion of black that I used. And you can see this is just a little bit warmer than this. Okay, so that's what I'm going for. There's a middle gray. All right, that's about a middle value of a middle black gray. All right, I used a middle black, added white, and I added enough white to make it a middle value. The proportion or the ratio of black to white is what determines the value of the color. Let me demonstrate that real quick. I'm going to take half of this. Let's pick up a little black. Okay, looky there. That's a dark gray. That's a middle gray. This has more black. This has more white. All right, that's a fairly straightforward concept. But if you've never painted before, you know, if this is your first time working with color of any kind, or if it's been a while, you know, I think most of us have probably dealt with paint at some point in time, and then some of us haven't. You know, we put it down back in kindergarten and haven't touched it since. Some of you, that may be true. Okay, some of you have been dealing with paint since high school. Some of you have taken other painting classes and you've got a little experience under your belt, so that's a concept you've been familiar with. Now, I'm going to make a cool black. Cool black has a greater portion of blue relative to the amount of burnt umber. Okay, look at that, more blue than there is burnt umber. So it's more blue, it's bluer. And when I mix that up, it'll still go black. In fact, you may observe that it appears darker. It appears darker in value. Well, okay. Not only is it darker in value, it's cooler. It's cooler in its tone. It's cooler in its temperature. Running out of room. Okay, so that looks pretty black. Actually, I'm going to put just a little more burnt umber, just a tad, just a touch. Okay, and you want a good thorough mix. It's important to mix the paint thoroughly. You're blending two colors, and if you don't do it thoroughly, you wind up with, you know, one color that's got streaks of the other color in it. That's not what we're trying to accomplish. We want a thoroughly mixed black. Now I can see, again, you may not be able to see this through the camera lens very well, but sitting next to it like I am, I can see that there's a tonal difference, even a slight value difference between my cool black and my middle black. The middle black appears warmer than the cool black that I've made. It's not just that the cool black's darker, the middle black is actually warmer in its tone. Now I'm going to demonstrate by making a gray. Okay, I'll take a portion of this cool black here. I'm washing off. I say washing off, I dip my knife into my can of mineral spirits and I'm wiping it off. All right. I'm going to get a little bit of white, just a touch. A little dab will do you. Some of you are old enough to maybe remember what that was a slogan for. Okay. And I'm going to make a gray. Look at that. Look how much bluer that gray is compared to these other grays that I made. That's a cool gray. Okay? Cool black, add white, cool gray. This is, if I had to judge it in terms of value, I would say this is a dark middle gray. It's not really dark enough to be dark, but it's darker than middle. Okay? So, look at that. It's a nice battleship gray. How about that? Or a cobalt blue gray. It's not cobalt, it's ultramarine. But you get what I mean. It's a blue gray. A steely gray. Okay? Steel. The color of steel. What is the riddle of steel? Okay. So, yeah, he just imitated Arnold Schwarzenegger. Sorry. Now I'm going to make a warm black. I've actually run out of room. You can see why I like to use a large palette. These smaller palettes run out of room pretty quick. I'm going to make a warm black. I'm going to have to stick it over here in the corner. Okay? So let's do that. Warm black will have a higher proportion or a higher ratio. Now when I say ratio, please understand, math majors, that I'm using that as a general term. Okay? I'm not giving you an actual numeric ratio for this. We have to learn by doing, okay? So when I say ratio, we're talking about the relative proportion. There's a relatively larger proportion of ultramarine blue. I'm sorry, I got my name wrong. Burnt umber, relatively larger, more substantial proportion of burnt umber compared to ultramarine blue. Let's get a little ultramarine blue going in here. Burnt umber is this beautiful, warm chocolate color, you know, like a dark chocolate brown. You know, it's a delicious looking color. Later, we're going to talk about earth tones for assignment number 2, and I'll show you some other earth tones besides the 3 that I showed you on the supply list. But this is a beautiful chocolate brown. If you've got that color brown coming out of your burnt umber tube, then you've gotten the correct color. Ultramarine blue, deep, dark, gorgeous blue. Sometimes you can also, you know, French ultramarine. I usually have a student or two who approaches me at the beginning of the semester. Mr. Lyles, I found this tube of paint. It said French ultramarine. Is that the same thing? Close enough. Okay. Yes, it is, practically speaking. Okay. So ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue, this is a strange color. Even though it's very dark in its value, it's very blue. That's why it's called ultramarine, like ultramarine. Ultra is being like bigger than, more than. Marine refers to the sea. Okay, it's ultra sea blue, right? It's like the blue of the deep blue ocean, the deep blue sea, if you will. And yet, as a color, it's very translucent. It's not particularly opaque. All right. If you used it all by itself, you would see it. You would see what I mean by translucent. Translucent means the light passes through it. You can see what's underneath it to some extent. Once you start mixing it with other colors, like we're doing now, mixing it in this case with burnt umber, its opacity changes. It becomes very opaque. Okay, the burnt umber lends its opacity to the ultramarine blue, while the ultramarine blue lends its darker value to the burnt umber. And that works in all 3 configurations, both middle, cool, and warm. Now, I've mixed a warm black. I can see that it is warmer than even my middle black, okay? And I'm going to test that theory right now. How do we test that theory? We make a gray. Gray, add some white, a little bit of white, just going to test it, and a little bit of my black, what I am assuming to be a warm black. Look at that. Notice how this gray, which happens to be a rather light gray, I'd say that was a middle light gray. Why? Because there's a fair amount of white compared to the amount of black that I used. Look how warm that is, right? It looks like mud. It looks like a very light mud. It's no longer warm enough like the burnt umber would be to give us kind of a more chocolate color. It's grayed down, obviously, and yet it's considerably warmer than the other grays. I'm going to do something real quick. I'm going to demonstrate what burnt umber does when you tint it. Okay, so I'm going to take some of this beautiful dark chocolate and mix it with some white. And what do we have? Chocolate milk. Look at there. Okay. Notice how much warmer that color is, that tint, when compared to this warm gray that I made. You see the difference? Okay, it's amazing what a little blue will do. Color acuity, folks. All right, so now I've mixed out all 3 of my blacks, and I'm going to make value scales for each one, okay? I'm going to get my 9x12 canvas panel. Ta-da! I'm going to use the colors that I've mixed. Ta-da! And I'm going to make grayscales, okay? Value scales. Let me get a brush. I'm going to use a flat. Is this clean enough? I have a metal coffee can. I'll show you. I have a metal coffee can, and then this fun little spirally thing that came off of another apparatus, actually a brush holder, and I jammed it down into the coffee can, and in the bottom of the coffee can is a tuna can punched through with holes so that paint sludge can collect down in the bottom. And I occasionally refill this metal coffee can with my solvent. It's got the brush holder in it, and it holds brushes that I'm using on any given painting. Good luck trying to find a metal coffee can today, these days. Most of the time, coffee cans are now plastic, and I think it makes the coffee taste bad. I drink it anyway because that's what's there, but I don't like the plastic containers. Plastic coffee containers, however, are great for collecting old paint. Okay, and they also work pretty well to hold brushes, so I use them for that. Anyway, if you happen to find a metal can, hang on to it. Okay, so I've cleaned this brush up. I've dipped it in my solvent, and I'm wiping out the bristles. It had a little bit of pink paint down in there. I think I've got enough of it out. I don't want to use a big brush. I'm using a medium-sized flat. What number is this? Well, actually it's a bright, but I've beat it up enough that it looks like a flat. Okay, so there you go. Middle black. Let's start with middle black. I'm going to make a middle black square, roughly an inch square. Okay? And then I'm going to make a row, probably about 1.5 inches really. I'm going to make a row of 6 values. So my color plus 6 values. And I'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to start, now I've already got some going. I'm going to make a dark gray, so I'm going to pick up a little more of my black. I'm going to come back to this. I don't know if you can see this. Let me orientate things so that they're visible. I'd like for you to be able to see what I'm doing. That's helpful, right? Okay, so I'm mixing a little more black into that earlier middle dark black, and what I want is a dark gray. Okay, your values, each color square that you make, it should be clear to your eye, no matter how inexperienced or experienced you might be. It should be clear to your eye that there is a clear transition in value. Now I actually lightened that up a bit some, because I thought it was too dark once I laid it down. See, we have to judge the color based on the color next to it. So I've got my black, I'm trying to make a dark gray, and I started by just placing a stroke or a line of color next to my black square. That looks good. I think that's a good value, so I'll go ahead and flesh that out approximately 1 inch. Okay, so I've got black and dark gray. Now I want to come up, so I'm going to come back to my palette. I'm going to take some of this dark gray that's on my brush. I'm going to mix a little bit of this earlier middle gray into it, and what I want is a value that's a clear step up in value from my dark gray. These individual squares need to be clear. That's pretty good. Okay, it needs to be clear that there's an ascension in value, that it's getting step by step lighter in value. 3 colors down, all right, middle black and 2 grays. Now I'm going to come up in value. I'll take some of that middle dark and I'm going to make a middle gray. Middle gray. Let's get a little lighter than that. Let the squares touch. Okay? It's difficult to judge the color if there's a white stripe from the board if there's a white stripe in between the colors, in between the squares, you're making it difficult to judge the value. I think that square needs to be lighter. I think that square, that middle square, is too dark. So I'm going to clean up my brush a little bit. I'm going to come back to the middle gray that I made. Wet on wet. That's wet paint underneath, wet paint on top. And I'm going to gently brush on the lighter value. And as I'm brushing, the two values will mix to some extent. And I'll wind up with a lighter value gray. Yes, that worked. That worked fine. And that's how you can adjust a square. Now here's how these exercises are going to go, folks. I'm going to do these demonstration videos and walk you through the exercise. You're going to execute the exercise, and then when it's done, you're going to send me a JPEG through email of what your finished exercise looks like. And I'm going to review it. And if it's complete, if it's, you know, if I think you're finished, if I think all your squares are differentiated from each other and you've got the right value and you seem to understand the difference between warm, middle, and cool, then I'll send you back a note saying you're done, move on, okay? And if you're not done, if there's a mistake, if something needs to be readdressed, then I'll send you back an email and say, well, this row looks pretty good, and that other row, the center colors are too close together in value. You need to go back and readdress that. And you readdress that, and then you resubmit it to me, and I'll judge whether or not you're done. And this is how all of these exercises will work. Remember, the exercises are an independent grade, or they're a separate grade, independent from the assignments, okay? And there's going to be 5 exercises, and when you get all of them done, when you get all 5 done, and they're all, if you do all 5, and you've done all 5 correctly, and I've judged that you're finished with it, ta-da! There's your A right there for the exercise grade. If you don't do them all, if you only do 4 out of 5, well, that's B. If I ask you to make a correction that you don't bother to make, and you don't resubmit the corrected exercise, and you don't get credit for it. If you do all 5 of them, and I tell you that you're done, that you've done it, that you're completed, then you get the credit, and we move on. That has nothing to do with our assignments, okay? Now the exercises, the color theory behind the exercises will always correlate to something that we're doing in the assignments. Okay, so get used to what I'm saying here. The exercises are one step, and the assignment is another step. The assignment is something different. Okay, we're going to do a painting assignment, an actual painting, where these blacks and these grays will be the colors that you use. But the exercise is you learning to mix blacks and grays and to judge value and temperature or tone. All right, you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? And by the way, once you have completed an assignment, when I've given the assignment, and I'll give due dates out. I think that needs to be a little bit lighter. You send it to me by the due date, preferably. And due dates are important. The due dates are going to help us stay on track. But I also understand our circumstances. I use the due dates as sort of a benchmarker so that I can keep us all on track. But I don't want to be the due date police necessarily. You understand what's needed. You understand, that you have to get things in on time. So anyway, when I send you this assignment, I'll send a due date out. But it can potentially be an ongoing project. All right, so where are we? Middle black, dark gray, dark middle gray, what would you call that? A light middle gray, actually probably closer to middle. Okay, so now I'm going to make the next value up. 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to have room for 5 and 6, plus the black. adding just a little bit of solvent, thin that down a little bit, adding just a little bit of oil. Oil makes it go. Added just a little bit more middle gray. I think that could be lighter, so I'll add just a little more white. Yeah, I was right. That was the right thing to do. I'm going to have to squeeze these last two boxes. I got that box a little too big. All right, now I want to make a very light gray. Bear in mind that the 6-value grayscale that I'm making, this is a theoretical postulation. How many grays are possible, Mr. Lyles? I don't know. How many you want to make? It's infinite. It's potentially infinite. But for our purposes, 6 will do. Now you can get light grays that are much lighter than that, but for the purpose of this exercise, that'll do. And you can see each one of these grays, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, is lighter than the one before it, okay? And then we have our middle black. Now, I'm actually going to get a different brush because I don't want to pollute my other colors. Is that soft enough? Let's use this one. Dip it in my solvent, get it nice and wet. Okay, that was middle. Now I'm going to use cool. Middle, cool, warm. Let's do this. The middle is in the middle. Let's put the cool over here on the right. Your right, my left. Bear left, right, frog. Cool black. All right. Now, I'm going to come back to my palette. I'll pick up some of this cool black. And I'm going to mix in, remember I made that middle gray as a test? I want to make a dark gray. A cool dark gray. What a gorgeous color. White blue. Still reads as gray. You don't want it so blue that it looks blue. You want it to be gray, but a very cool gray. You don't want your warm to be so warm that it looks like it's brown. You want it to be a warm gray, okay? We still want to function within the grays. We're making grays after all. There's a good dark gray. Look how steely that is. Look how cool that is compared to the black. All right? It's only a change in value. That's all. That's all. It's a dark, cool gray. Let's make a dark middle gray. So I've got all this dark gray on my brush. I'm going to get a little more of this middle gray. I'm using my brush to mix. You can use your palette knife to mix. That's probably the better thing to do. I'm using my brush to mix, which means that I'm actually pushing a bunch of this paint up into the ferrule. If I'm not careful, it can bleed into other colors. Let's see what I've got here. There we go. It's a lighter value. It's still quite dark, but it's a lighter value than that dark gray. I think I really should need a softer brush. I'm getting streaks. When you use a bristle brush, a hog's hair brush, the hairs are stiff and they tend to dig into the underlayers. Now, if that's what you want, if that's what you're going for in terms of the aesthetic of your paintings, that's great. Okay, hog's hair brushes were made so that painters could work very quickly and lay down a lot of color in a fast amount of time. The Impressionists liked the hog hair brushes. The softer hair brushes, natural fibers, you know, squirrel, rabbit, sable, weasel, those kinds of things. Sableine now, nylon. or a mix of artificial and natural fibers. That's quite common. Those softer brushes allow you to paint one color on top of another, even though the paint is wet, and still be able to not dig into the paint. So that's why it's good to have different kinds of brushes. Okay, and clean this one up a little bit. I'm going to go back to my softer Sabeline artificial brush because it's significantly softer. Let me just clean it up a little bit. I'm using the solvent to thin the paint and push out paint. And I'm using my rag to clean the brush. Okay, now let's move forward. Middle gray, middle cool gray, approximately 1 inch square. I actually made a rectangle. Okay. Now I'm going to get some more white. Set the white next to the middle gray. I'm going to take the middle gray from my brush and mix in some more white and make a lighter gray. Let's see if I've got it light enough. I paint a stroke next to, that's not bad. I think I can get a little bit lighter and be okay. Remember, each square needs to be a lighter step in value, or one full step in value up from the square that preceded it. Value scales. Value, value, value. Scale, scale, scale. Now I'm going to make a lighter, even more light. Ooh, I think that's just about doing it. We did this in Design 1, Mr. Lyles. Good! Excellent! Did you use oil paint? Probably not. I don't care how advanced you may be. Whatever other paint courses you may have taken, how talented you might be. Did the angels kiss you when you were born and make you the world's greatest painter? Good for you. You need to use, or you need to practice, okay? I've been painting, oh goodness gracious, 35 years. Started when I was in high school. Been drawing longer than that. You never outgrow the fundamentals. Never, never, never. What does happen is that you begin to understand the fundamentals at a deeper level, okay? So the fundamentals are always important. When I'm doing these color mixing exercises, ladies and gentlemen, they benefit me just as much as they benefit you, maybe even more. So, whatever you did in Design 1, whatever you did in Painting 1, whatever you did in somebody else's painting class, that's good. I'm glad you had that exposure. We're going to do this again because it's good for you. It's strength training. Look there! Middle gray, cool gray. Do you see the difference? Look how much bluer these grays are compared to these. Middle gray, blue gray. Now, we're really going to have some fun. We are going to make a value scale using warm black, and we're going to make warm grays. Dum, dum, dum. Isn't that exciting? It will be. It's amazing. It's amazing your ability to see differentiations in color, particularly colors that tend towards red. That's a human ability. Is amazing. Okay? You have so much more strength than what you might realize. And an exercise like this helps you to consciously become aware of that, to break it down. All right, so now I'm going to paint my warm black square. For me, this is on the right side. For you, it's on the left. Okay. And from there, I'm going to make a series of grays. Black, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 grays. That's what's coming next. Here's a fun challenge. Try to make the values correlate to each other, okay? Here's my dark cool gray. Here's my dark middle gray. Are they related to each other in value? You see, there's a difference between tone and value, okay? When I say tone, I'm referring to how warm or cool the color is. When I say value, I'm referring to how dark or light the color is. It's possible for two colors, two totally different colors, to be similar in value and yet different in tone, okay? So can you match values? No, I didn't succeed. I didn't make it perfect. But it's a good challenge to try to do that, okay? So what are we doing? We're doing a dark, warm gray. So I've got some of my warm black. I'm going to pick up some of that light middle gray I made before, and I'm going to mix it in. There we go. That's pretty close. There we go. Let's check it out. You know, I think I can get that a little darker. Let's get a little darker value going there. Boy, it didn't take much white at all, did it? Just a little dab of white, and that thing went very pale, very quick. So now I'm darkening down the dark gray. That's a little better. That's a little better. Let's see. Let me go ahead and make a square out of that, or a rectangle as the case may be. How can you judge value? How can you see value more clearly? Okay, you're gonna freak over this one. Squint your eyes. Yeah, when you squint your eye, right, you can see dark and light more clearly. You don't see details, right? But you can judge value. And I'm squinting my eye now, and I think that dark gray, dark warm gray is too light. It's too light in value. Remember your eyes, what are they? It's cones, right? Any biology majors out there? Anybody know about optics? Your eye has cones, and I forget what the other thing's called. But when you squint, you're limiting your field of vision, and you're no longer seeing color quite so much as you are value. As we go along in the semester, you will begin to understand the difference between a color and a value. And judging a color is sometimes a different matter than judging a value. Okay, so now I'm trying to unload this brush, and I'm mixing in some of the darker value. I've picked up some black, and I've mixed it in on my palette, and I'm trying to lay it down so that I get a darker value on this square. That looks a bit darker to me. It's not quite enough. Let me just lay some black in there, and I'll mix it in. Hey, that's better. More of a woody color, huh? Okay, there we go. Dark, warm gray. Ta-da! Now, let's make a lighter dark, warm gray. I'm going to learn from last time. I'm going to not mix it quite so light on my palette. There we go. Let's see. I still want it to be a different value. You know what? I think I can get a little bit lighter. I'll tell you another little secret. It's easier to get lighter than it is to get darker. To darken a value takes a little more effort than it is to lighten a value. Lighten a value, just add a little more white. To darken a value, I've got to add a little more of the color. I've got to judge it. I've got to squint at it. I've got to, is that right? I don't know. Okay. Warm black, two values of dark warm gray. You see how different they are by comparison? By comparison, my warm gray to the middle gray looks quite warm indeed. Now, let's get a lighter value going. We want these to be a full step in value. But I don't want to jump ahead too far. There we go. That's looking good. Now, I want to make a prediction. As my warm grays get lighter in value, they're going to look like putty, right? The lighter they get in value, the more they're going to look like just some sort of gray putty. Bleh. Looky there. Dum da dum da da dum. All right, I need some more white. I go to my white. Try to avoid sticking your brush that has all the color on it, sticking it into your white. Use a knife. Have a separate knife just for your white paint. Deliver the paint to where you need it on the palette. This keeps your white clean, and you're not muddying up your colors accidentally. Nothing wrong with muddying up your colors if you do it on purpose, if you're trying to make a muddy color deliberately. But if you're trying to do a color mixing exercise, keep that white by itself. Put it where you need it, when you need it. I think we can get lighter than that. There we go. Now we're going to make our lightest gray. I'm going to add more white to it. More white, more titanium white into the warm black, which is making different values of gray. And let's get lighter than that. Let's go for an extreme here. Come on. There we go. And I'm actually using that as a judge for value. I want to get this value, this or close to or the same as that value, even though it's warm as opposed to middle. There we go. So, cool black, middle black, warm black. Dark gray, dark middle gray, middle light, light, lightest. Black, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, black plus 6 grays. Do a row of middle grays, do a row of warm grays, do a row of cool grays. Again, I will be sending out this video to my class, to you, soon, possibly this evening or early tomorrow. And I have some written instructions that I'll send along, some written instructions from this assignment that I did a similar assignment to this last semester, and I wrote it out. And I actually started doing these videos because it became obvious that the video demonstration was needed, and it took me a minute to figure out that that was going to be the case. Sorry. But anyway, now you'll have a video demonstration of the exercise, plus I'll send you some written notes about the exercise. I'll also take a look at the calendar and schedule a due date for this, probably a week. Probably I'll give you a week for this. The next video that'll be coming out, which will likely be sent to you early next week, will be over the actual assignment, okay? And we'll be using this color scheme to make a still life painting, all right? And I'll walk you through that step by step. So, don't panic, one step at a time. We're moving forward. First color exercise, mix your 3 blacks, warm black, middle black, cool black. Make your 3 rows of value scale, right? Cool, middle, warm. Do it like this, and you'll be doing just fine. All right, see you next time. Stay tuned.